Okay, so let's get started on government incentive programs for curling clubs. And we'd very much like to thank BDO for collaborating with Curling Canada and our member associations to assist in providing some clarity to the programs that are available to the curling community in Canada. BDO is the fifth largest accounting firm in Canada, and they are the auditors and advisors to Curling Canada. It's my pleasure right now to introduce Mr. Robert Rayom, who will lead the session today. Over to you, Robert.
So thank you, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the webinar on Government Incentive Program. This event, facilitated by Curling Canada, and we thank them for this initiative. It's something very important. I know we're supposed to have over 200 participants today, so this is definitely an indication of the level of interest in this topic. So we hope to provide some clarity on 4 programs today that are available for clubs. So we're going to make this presentation really specific to curling. So I'll just first introduce these panel of speakers. So my name is Robert Rayom. I'm a partner in the National Capital Region, and I'm responsible for the audit practice in our nation's capital. Nadine Atkinson is Senior Manager in the audit practice and is one of our experts in sports organization when it comes to auditing and consulting services. And Francine Prévost, Senior Manager in our tax practice, and is one of our experts that has concentrated on getting top knowledge on government incentives as they keep coming up. And as you're well aware, government programs are changing daily. So what we present today could change in an hour from now. We're hoping it does not, but it definitely could change every minute. I found about a change about 5 minutes before joining. So at this point, I'll just give you the agenda. So we will cover 4 topics. We'll cover the Small Business Wage Subsidy, which is a 10% wage program, and Nadine will go through that process. Then she'll go through the Canadian Emergency Bank Account, a $40,000 loan that's available. Then Francine's going to talk about the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the most significant of wage subsidy that's been put out by our federal government, up to 75% of salaries. And then I'll conclude with covering other programs. I'll talk about the one that came out about three and a half weeks ago, about emergency funding for sports and how that impacts the curling community and some of you specifically. And I will touch a little bit on some provincial programs, and then we'll go into a question period. Like Danny said, after each presentation, we'll give Danny the opportunity to ask maybe 1 or 2 critical questions that people have. But we will get back at the end. We should have time to take a little bit more time on some questions. So I see Nadine has joined us. So Nadine, I'll ask you to share your screen. I'll stop presenting and I'll let you take the first 2 sections.
So I'm going to be explaining to you the Small Business Wage Subsidy. I'll go through a high-level overview of the program, how to apply for it, and then finally we will go through some examples. So this program is pretty broad, and who it applies to is almost all small businesses and not-for-profits and charities. The caveat is that you have to have an existing payroll account with the CRA already before applying for it. And it's for any payroll amounts that you pay, so something like salaries, bonuses, or commissions to any employees in Canada. So it will affect almost everyone, which is great news. To go back to the wage subsidy, it's for a 3-month period from March 18th, 2020 to June 9th, 2020. And it is a 10% subsidy of any eligible payroll costs paid up to a maximum of $1,375 per employee or $25,000 per employer. And it's important to note that this actually isn't money that you receive from the government, but it does reduce the amount of remittance that you have to send to the government for their payroll expenses. So it kind of evens out to the same thing in the end. And it also does reduce the amount of any Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy that you would be eligible to receive. So that's the 75% that Francine will be talking about later on. So those 2 programs kind of work in tandem. to form an overall subsidy that you get for wages. Now, you may be interested in wondering why you would apply for this program, since it's pretty much at the end of June, of the program in June. And there are a couple of reasons. So the first one is, the good news is that the program is actually retroactive. So if you haven't reduced your payroll remittances in the past, you can actually go back and calculate the entire 10% of the subsidy on any payroll that you paid for that 3-month period. And then you'll either get a credit on your CRA account that you can use to submit less payroll source deductions in the future, or you'll get a payout from the government at the end of the year once they do a reconciliation. I imagine that second process to get the payout would be pretty slow though. So if you can reduce your source deductions, you'll see an immediate impact on your cash flow, and it won't take as long as waiting for the payout in the end. Also, another reason that you might want to apply for this program is if you don't qualify for the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy of 75%. So it would be great to get the full 75%, but if you are not eligible for that program, then this is a great second option. And now the most important part, how do you apply for the program? So right now it's just a manual calculation. So the employer will actually go through the process of finding out their payroll costs for that period, taking the 10%, and then manually deducting it from their CRA remittances. There will be a form available on the CRA website for self-identification, where you can report the amount that you will submit in the future, or say how much you claimed. That will result in your reduction to the source amounts in the future, but that form's not yet available. And the CRA just introduced a new measure. Before, they used to automatically assume that you were going to claim the full 10% of this subsidy, and that would reduce your 75% amount of the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, as I mentioned earlier. But they realized that there are a lot of things that businesses and organizations are going through. There's already a lot of paperwork and a lot of programs that they need to apply for. So they actually just introduced a measure where you can elect to claim 0% of this subsidy and just apply for the other one that Francine will talk about later. These two examples are really similar. The first one I'll go through in detail, and then if you have any questions about the second, I can answer them at the end of the period. So in this case, the employer has 2 employees with combined payroll for the period of $3,500, and they would withhold tax of $700 at that amount. So the subsidy that you're eligible for is 10% of that full $3,500, or $350. And then you would reduce the source deduction payment that you make to the CRA by $350, leaving extra money in your pocket at that time. And that is it for the Small Business Wage Subsidy. And then the next program that we have is the Canada Emergency Business Loan. So there's lots of acronyms you'll see, but this one is an important one to note. So again, I'll go through a high-level overview of the program, and then I'll get to the most important part, which is the application process. So when does this program apply? It actually became available April 16th, so you can apply for it now if you haven't already. It's already available. Who does it apply to? It's for any small business, not-for-profit, or charity that paid payroll between $25,000 and $1.5 million in 2019. And what is this program? So it's an interest-free $40,000 loan. And if you're able to repay the amount before December 31st, 2022, then it results in a loan forgiveness of 25% or up to $10,000. And how do you apply for this program? So the application is made online with your existing financial institution. So that's great news because you can keep your social distancing and everyone can stay safe. You just need to make sure that you have the necessary information available, like the T4 summary to support your payroll expense. And then finally, why would you apply for this program? So this one's an easy one. It definitely helps with your cash flow and your operating expenses at the current moment. But most importantly, if you think you'll be able to repay the amount by December 31st, 2022, it's free money, which is great news for all the organizations and businesses at this time because it's a tough time, so anything helps. Are there any questions?
Yeah, it's Danny. I had a couple of questions come in after the wage subsidy one. The first one was, Is this taxable income to the business?
It is, yes. So unfortunately, there is assistance, but then the CRA does turn around and tax it. So if you're a not-for-profit, that wouldn't apply. But if you are a small business, you do have to pay tax on it at the end of the year.
Yeah, I'm not sure any curling clubs in Canada actually pay tax.
So the good news on that part is you're probably safe there, or you would be safe there.
Okay, next question I got was, if we've already received the 75%, is there any sense in applying for the 10%?
So no, because as I mentioned before, they form one package. So you're only able to receive up to 75% total. But one important thing that you should do is when the self-assessment form becomes available on the CRA website, is you should self-assess that you would like to elect 0% for this claim instead of the 10%. Otherwise, the CRA might automatically assess you at the 10% and try and claw back some of your Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. So they do recommend on the CRA website that even if you're not claiming it, you send in a form saying you're not claiming it, just to make sure that nothing gets clawed back.
Okay, I have 3 or 4 really good questions here that I think we should take the time to do now, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully I can answer them all.
So on the $40,000, what is the interest rate if not repaid?
I believe it's always interest-free. You just lose out on the potential benefit of having a 25% forgiveness.
Okay. Some of our, this is a good question. Some of our key staff people in curling clubs are contract employees, more specifically the ice technicians. Can we use their contract dollars towards meeting the 25,000 minimum?
It would depend on whether they're paid with a T4. So if they're paid with through an invoice, or if they're paid with a T4A, it would not qualify. It's only if it's a T4, I believe. So you would take your T4 summary of what you filed for the prior calendar year, 2019, and only the costs that are on that T4 summary would qualify. Okay.
So maybe a couple of clarification, Danny. So definitely contractors are not included. In regards to the loan, there's no interest until I think the interest starts in 2023, so it's interest free to that point. And in 2023, it's at 5%.
Thank you. 2 more questions quickly. Do you have to apply for the full 40,000?
I can answer that one if you want, Nadine. So actually, we definitely recommend applying for the full 40. The financial institutions right now, once you apply, have automatically granted 40,000 to each entity. They haven't made a difference between a $20,000 or $40,000 loan. So if you apply and you wanted less, I would say you should contact your financial institution directly. Now, remember, if you have a lesser amount, only 25% will be a forgiveness of loan. So if you only took 20, your forgiveness of loan would only be half of the 10,000 eligible one.
Okay. Final question on this. And does it matter what the financial status is of the club? Do you have to prove you need money?
I don't believe so. Probably so, confirm, but.
Yeah, like the application doesn't require anything.
Available to everyone.
It's eligible, it's available for everyone. The idea is that this would be to help you with your operating costs. So I'm assuming everybody's in a situation now with either between wages or rent or property taxes or any operating costs, those money are eligible to be used for the period of the program.
Okay, thank you. That's it for questions at this point.
Okay, Nadine, if you want to stop sharing, we'll have Francine share her laptop.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, so the CEWS, which is the 75% wage subsidy. This is available to pretty much businesses of all sizes, from small to large to medium, and it's to mitigate job losses as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, to try to get employers to rehire workers that were previously laid off, prevent future job losses, and also better position employers to get back running as quickly as possible and to resume normal operations after the crisis, whenever that may be. So here there's a couple concepts that we're going to talk about when we're talking about the 75% wage subsidy. There's a few concepts that are important, such as eligible employers. So which kind of employers can apply for this wage subsidy? For which employees can they apply for it? Also, what's the eligible remuneration? How much can they get under this wage subsidy? And qualified revenues, which revenues do they use to calculate whether they're eligible or not? So we'll go first with the eligible employers. So here the CRA says that it could be individuals, which include trusts, taxable corporations, persons that are exempt from corporate tax, except for public institutions. So here we'd be talking about municipalities, crown corporations, colleges, hospitals. They would not be eligible for it. Not-for-profit organizations, agricultural organizations, boards of trades, chamber of commerces, registered charities, and partnerships which consist of 50% eligible employers. So any of these that I just listed would be members, which is changed from the beginning of the program, because at the beginning they were saying that all the members of a partnership needed to be eligible employers. So here they're broadening which partnerships can claim this, which is great. And registered Canadian Amateur Athletic Associations were added to eligible employers in May, which is great news. Now we'll go on to eligible employees. So this would be an individual employed in Canada during the claim period. And here we'll go through what the different claim periods are. And here it'd be except if this individual, if there was 14 or more consecutive days for which they were not paid, then they can't, they're not eligible for it. So we'll say they were laid off and not paid for 3 weeks within that claim period, then that's not an eligible employee and they can't be added to the calculation. Eligible remuneration are amounts paid to eligible employees. The most popular ones would be salary, wages, other remuneration, certain taxable benefits, as long as these amounts are actually paid. Fees, commissions, things like that. And then we have the qualified revenues. So these are revenues that are earned in Canada from selling goods, rendering services, and the use of others of your resources. It would exclude amounts that are earned from non-arm's length sources. It would exclude extraordinary items and amounts on account of capital. And for charities and NPOs, they can choose to include revenue from government sources as part of the calculation, as long as the same approach is used throughout the whole program period. So you can't change it from claim period. It has to be used consistently. And if these if you do not want to include these sources of revenue, so the government sources of revenue, then an election must be filed. So the general rule is that these are going to be included for charities and NPOs. And then if you want to be an exception to that, then there's an election, which is a form that can be filled out. And for registered charities, revenues from related businesses would be included in qualifying revenue. And to determine what the qualifying revenue is, it's in accordance with normal accounting practices. So if a normal accounting practice is the accrual method, then you can elect to calculate the qualifying revenue under the cash method instead. However, the other way around, Sari has said, cannot be done. So whether when you use the cash flow method as your normal accounting, you can't elect to choose the accrual method. So here I was talking about the eligible periods. Here we have 3 periods. So the first period is March 15 to April 11th. And there was a 15% required reduction in revenue. So you had to have seen a loss of revenue of at least 15%. And how do you calculate this? So you compare your revenue in March 2020, and you can choose to either compare to March 2019 for an average of January and February 2020. And here to note that whatever method that you use in the first period has to be the same method used throughout the other periods. So it'd be good to not just look at the first period, but look at period 2, period 3, and see what is more beneficial for you, so that you can claim as much as you can and that you're eligible, hopefully for all the periods. And another thing to note is if you're eligible for the first period, then you're deemed, so you're automatically eligible for the second period. So then we'll say if you want to determine if you're eligible for period 3, if you were eligible for period 2, then you would be automatically eligible for period 3. But the calculation would have to be made for period 2, which is from April 12th to May 9th. And that's a 30% required reduction in revenue, which is more significant. And this too, like I said, you have to choose, and it would be based on what you chose for period 1. So for period 1, you chose to compare your revenue, March 2020 revenue, to your March 2019. Then for the following period, you'd have to look at your April 2019 revenue compared to April 2020. And then the third period is May 10 to June 6, and also 30% reduction in revenue. And it's also the same method to determine this. So the applications opened up on April 27th. And here we have the election under paragraph 125.7. That's under the Income Tax Act. And this I discussed previously about regarding the cash method, whether you want to use this to determine your qualifying revenue. And Finance has the ability to extend the eligible periods to September 30th. And I believe it's the next slide. There were announcements on May that the federal government did, and this extends the period for an additional 12 weeks. So it extends it up to August 29th. So that's great news, because I'm sure this is a huge help for a lot of businesses. And they haven't specified, though, what the reduction in revenue is for these other periods, whether they will be 15%, stay at 30%, or if they're going to change it. So more details to come on this in the following weeks. As I mentioned previously, they've broadened who is eligible for this wage subsidy, which is great because a lot of people could use this right now and try to get their employees back working, as opposed to being laid off and having to rely on other methods. So here, the amount of the subsidy, so once you've established that you are eligible for the subsidy, there's a calculation to be made, which can be a bit tricky. The CRA has a calculator online, which is very helpful. So the subsidy is the greater of, and here there's two elements in the bullets. So the first element is 75% of the amount of remuneration paid, and it's up to $847 per week. And then the second bullet has two components to it, and you have to look within these two components, and this one is whichever is less. So the amount of remuneration paid, once again, up to $847 per week, or 75% of the employee's pre-crisis weekly remuneration, whichever is less. So the first step would be to establish in the second bullet which one is less, and then you take that amount and compare it to the 75% up to 847 to determine which one of these is the greater of. So that part is probably the trickiest part, I think, just trying to get all the numbers right. So the pre-crisis remuneration, which is baseline remuneration, is the average weekly remuneration. It's paid between January 1st and March 15th inclusively, and that's of 2020. It also excludes 7-day periods where the employee was not paid. So this is really what they're looking at to try to base themselves on, and is used in the first component to try to establish what is the subsidy. And like I mentioned previously, if we look at the claim period, that would be the March 15th to April 11th for the first period. And if an employee, so it's really on an employee per employee basis, also on a week per week basis. Here we would look to see, well, has there been 14 days consecutively that the employee was not paid? Then that employee is automatically excluded for that period. Illegible remuneration, we discussed this: salary, wages, bonuses, commissions. There's also, the government has proposed to introduce a second baseline remuneration. The period would be March 1st to May 31st, 2019. And that's to accommodate seasonal workers or those who may have been on leave in the January 1st to March 15th, 2020 period. This hasn't been passed yet, so it's still just proposed. And illegible remuneration does not include severance pay or stock option benefits. So how do you apply for this subsidy? There's a couple different ways. You can do so through CRA My Business Account portal. You can use your pre-existing account with the program, or you can request open an account by an authorized person. You can also apply through Represent a Client. Only representatives authorized at level 2 or 3 are able to do this for you. There's also an application through CRA's online web form using a web access code. So this is a web-based application, and you have to have a code which you can apply online with CRA for this code. So they'll ask you your account number, your date of registration, and a total income tax reported in box 22 of your most recent 2018 T4 summary. And it's important to note that to be eligible for this, you have to apply before October 2020 and attest that the application is complete and accurate. And that's a specific form that you can get online and that you would file with your application. You also have to have a BN for purposes of payroll withholding remittances on March 15, 2020 to qualify. What information do you need for each application? So there's quite a few lines, as you can see here. And each organization with a separate RP number, payroll account number, they have to apply separately. So line A would be the number of eligible employees. So you have to determine if some are excluded because they haven't been paid for, or they haven't been paid for 14 consecutive days or more. Line B is the total eligible remuneration paid during this period. C is the calculation of your Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which is through a CRA Excel file. Line D is employer's EI QPIP premiums payable on salary paid to furloughed employees. Line E, employer's CPP and QPP contributions payable on salary paid to furloughed employees. And then you have to deduct from line F is the 10% temporary wage subsidy reduction for employers. That would be deducted from, if you did receive it, then you have to deduct this from the 75%. Line G, amounts received by eligible employees under the work sharing benefit program. This also has to be deducted from the 75% subsidy. And line H would be your subsidy, which would be automatically calculated once you've established all these other factors. And the attestation form also has to be completed for each organization. And I said it was available for download on CRA's website. And consistent elections, like I had mentioned previously, you can elect to use a different accounting method. So these elections have to be applied consistently throughout the different periods. So that's just one thing to take into consideration, just to not, you can't change it throughout. So you have to just make sure that the choice you make will be beneficial for you throughout all of your claim periods. So here we have some frequently asked questions that I'll go through. So number one, can an eligible employer claim the wage subsidy for an employee that the employer hires back and pays retroactively? So the answer here is yes, as long as they meet all of the eligibility criteria for the claim period and that they are rehired and paid before they are included in the subsidy calculation. So here it's you're paying the employees and then you're receiving the 75% back. So it's not kind of like where you receive the 75% back and you can pay your employees with that. They actually have to be paid. Number two, when calculating the wage subsidy, should I consider wages paid or wages paid in respect of that week. So here it's really, and I'll show an example in the next slide of a calculation. It's really, you look at the salary on a week per week basis. So you wouldn't be rounding or estimating. It's really on a week per week basis, no matter what the payroll period is. Number 3, can an eligible employer claim this wage subsidy in respect of an eligible employee who has received payments under the CERB? Here it's yes, but if the employee is no longer eligible for the CERB for the periods in which they received the benefit, because they've been hired back and they're receiving a salary, the employee may be required to repay it. So this would be, could be in the case of an employee hired back retroactively. So here, the employee really has to be careful to make sure that they are still eligible for those amounts, because otherwise they have to repay these. Number 4, what is baseline remuneration? So baseline remuneration is the average weekly eligible remuneration paid to an eligible employee. And this is for the period January 1st, 2020 and ending March 15, 2020. And like I mentioned previously, any period of 7 or more consecutive days for which they were not paid is excluded. Number 5, will I be eligible for both the wage subsidy and the 10% small business wage subsidy? So employers can be eligible for both, but like I mentioned previously, the amounts claimed for the 10% subsidy will reduce the 75% wage subsidy claimed for that same period. So you can be eligible for both, but you just have to deduct it. So there's no really like any double dipping. Number 6, can owners and non-arm's length employees claim the wage subsidy? The answer here is yes, as long as the individual was an eligible employee anytime during the period of January 1st and ending March 15, 2020, and was paid eligible remuneration for that time. We'll see an example that's also part of the example in the next slide. Number 7, can I claim the wage subsidy twice if an eligible employee is employed by 2 or more eligible employers? Here the answer is no. One eligible employer cannot claim the wage subsidy twice for an eligible employee. It's a maximum of $847 per eligible employee per week. And the last one is the wage subsidy considered taxable income? Yes, it's considered as assistance received from a government, and the eligible remuneration paid to the employee will be a deductible expense for the employer. So here, I'm not sure if you can see, it's a bit small. So this is the example of the calculator, which is on the CRA website. So here in the first column, you would have all your eligible employees, and then you would establish whether they're at arm's length, yes or no. After, it's the average weekly gross pay, and this is for the January 1st to March 15, 2020 period. As you'll see here at the bottom, this one, it's a non-arm length employee. They didn't receive any remuneration for that period, so they would not be able to get any amount under the wage subsidy, even if here they were paid throughout that claim period. So here we're in the March 15th to April 11th period. Even if they were paid during that period, because they weren't paid in the January 1st to March 15th period, they're not eligible. So here, like I said, it's really a week per week calculation, and maximum $847 a week. And then it depends on what's the lesser of, because here we have 1,500 and the 847 was the, the higher of both. So that's the one that applies. And here $1,000 would be $750 because that's the higher one. So that's basically how it is. It is a bit complex, and there's a lot of different rules and exceptions. So if you ever need any help with this, we could definitely help out. That was a lot of information. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
So there was a question about the salary range between 25,000 and 1.5 million. So this would be on your previous year. So it would not be what you're expecting to pay in 2020. It would be based on the previous year's amount of salary that you paid. And even on the, when initially came out, it was based on the $50,000, but now it's down to 25. So I'm just going through, see if there's some, there's some about the loan, so we'll get to those at the end. So there was a question about if we needed to file a form for electing either on a cash flow basis or an accrual basis. You make that decision, and you need to keep record of your decision and be able to support how you've calculated it. So it's just record keeping internally for in situation where Revenue Canada could come and do an audit. And maybe on that topic, Revenue Canada is very likely to do a fair number of audits when it comes to the wage subsidy. Francine, maybe you can help me here. There's a question about how long after the period do you have to apply for any of the eligible period. In my mind, I have September, but you probably have a better idea than me on the when is the latest time when you can go back and apply for any of those periods. So there was a question, it's a good question here. If we qualified for the first period, but had no wages in the second period, can we apply again for the third period? The answer is yes. The claims are made by period, but because let's say you qualified in the first, you were automatically qualified for the second, because you're no longer doing any claim in the second one, you'd have to re-meet the test to qualify. But definitely, if you have your 30% decline or more in revenue and you paid salaries in the third period, you could do a claim for that period. There's a really good question about, is contract employee eligible under this program? So I guess we have to define what contract. So basically what is eligible is amounts that would go on a T4. So if the contractor is self-employed and you issue either a T4A or you pay invoices, they would not qualify under the program. So they have to be basically individuals on your payroll for which there is source deductions from them. Danny, I don't know if there's more that have started to show up on yours.
347, what if you use a payroll service provider and don't have a PR number?
Okay, that's a good question. You do have a PR number. Your payroll provider is using it to do your remittance. So basically that PR number is your account with Revenue Canada. And PR would be for payroll, and it would, like if you're subject to HST, you'd have another letters for it. But if you are with a payroll provider, you definitely have a PR account number and you would be eligible. And yeah, and some service providers are assisting organization to work through this, but they cannot file the application for you unless they're authorized as one of your individuals authorized on your account.
Okay. Club manager worked and was paid in full from March 18th to May 15th when seasonal contract ended. Is the curling club eligible to collect salary loss during the period March 19th to May 15th?
So this question from Gord. So the salary loss, do you mean like I'm assuming you're talking about the loss, the fact that you've actually paid. So the key thing is you have to be has to be an employee paid. So even though he's a seasonal employee, so if you actually paid salaries in the period of March 18th to May 15th, those remuneration would be considered illegible. Again, you could make a claim, but only if you meet the criterias required for loss of revenue, that it'd be 15% in the first period or 30% in the second.
Yeah, in most cases, most curling clubs in Canada were closed on March 18th, so
yeah,
there would be a loss of revenue.
But there would be, yeah, so there would be a decline in revenue, but salary paid continuing, even if the employee is not working and you are paying salaries, those salaries in the eligible periods qualify.
Okay. Uh,
So maybe I can go through the other one, which will be very quick.
yep.
So then we can come back, and I'm sure most of the questions will be with the major subsidy. It's 75%. It's very attractive for organization. We just need to make sure that you qualify in accordance to the revenue selection, the revenue decline, as well as having eligible employees. In the case of for the curling clubs and the curling ecosystem, like non-arm's length employee would be a non-issue for you, because this would be more where if I take you back to a private enterprise where the shareholders pays himself a salary, he's considered non-arm's length to the company. So he would have to have been on salary January to March 25th, March 15th. He can't just not pay himself a salary, then decide because this is now available, that he starts paying himself a salary, him or herself a salary. So it is just to avoid people playing with the system if they are non-arm's length. So I'll cover other programs. Two things. I'll cover emergency funding for sports. It's a new program that was finally launched. I'm going to talk only about the sports element, but this program was actually launched much brighter, including events and various other organizations. But I'll focus on the emergency funding for sports, and I'll have a little brief note on provincial programs. So basically, the funding for sports is for a total of 72 million. So just to give you a little bit of background, so 72 million will be divided in two sectors. The first sector is for the National Sports Association for a total of 39.5 million. So for you guys, this is Curling Canada. So they would be eligible for a portion of these amounts. The amounts are going to be split into two areas. And this agreement is for basically all sports across Canada. So this is a full agreement between Acting Agent Sports Canada with all provincial and territories in regards to National Sports Association. So the first part of the National Sports Association possibility is 32.5 million in regards to funding. How this is processing is basically all National Sports Association had to submit their request and their certification and attestation by May 25th. And they would be considered, depending on the severity of how they are impacted, of having up to 25% of their current Sports Canada as a premium funding. So that's the amount that would be based. Basically, the funding area would cover what they call base level, enhanced excellence, and the next generation of programs under Sports Canada identification. The second part of this is another 5 million. It's emergency funding basically for athlete assistance program. Because many events have been canceled, there would be athletes that may not be able to qualify or obtain their sports card in regards to their sports discipline. So this is to help the athletes, and helps the events, hopefully, to get these individuals into an opportunity to qualify. So if we're talking about Olympics, like say for Curling Canada, and there would be no events to have a qualifier, how does Curling in Canada establish their teams, and how do they support them for their bid for the Olympics, for example? Now, the most relevant and key part for you is the other portion. So the other portion is basically 34 million. They haven't provided how this is going to be allocated. Right now, the thoughts is this is going to flow through the provincial sports organization. That's the first part of it. These funds are to help basically support grassroots programs and recreational program. What the intent of the federal government here is, through the pandemic, a lot of people don't have an opportunity to go outside or do anything. So the thought is, once we can relax more of these restrictions, everybody's going to need something to basically go and enjoy. And there's a strong feeling by the by Canada, that sports will play a huge role in that part, from the youngest of children that we have all the way to our people that are on retirement. Having the ability to socialize, having the ability to play sports is considered to have a major impact on the mental health of individuals. So this is what this pot of money is going to be available. So the province, all the provincial bodies will work with Sports Canada on how this money is to be allocated. So again, key impact to get a big part of that is grassroots programs, recreational program. So at this point, it's almost an advocacy point that I raise for you, the community of Curling Canada. We need all of you to talk to your MPs, basically to promote the importance that curling has in Canada, what it does for the larger community and of all age group. The more importance we can put to Curling Canada, the larger portion the curling, sorry, I keep referring to Curling Canada, but just the curling community, the larger the curling community is going to get of that 34.5 million. So it's not going to be split evenly. The concept is the organization that can demonstrate the most significant impact on our community with regards to grassroots and recreational program will basically get a larger piece of the pie for their group. So every one of you, if you have any contacts with your MP, go promote curling and get a greater share of that $34.5 million. So there's a link here that I provide. It will be part of the slides that we're going to share with everybody. So it will give you a little bit more of the background of how the program was set up. Now, the last part is about provincial programs. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. The slides will provide you specific areas and various areas, that it'd be Quebec, Manitoba, Eastern Canada, what Ontario is doing. The vast majority of the programs provincially have been in the deferral of payments. So if any of you were subject to workers' safety premiums, you had employer health tax, there's a lot of deferrals, so payments did not have to be paid for a period until a later date. A lot of them are pushed to June, some of them are pushed to the end of the summer. So it's just to provide a little bit ease on cash flows for organization during the pandemic. The balance of the other items are mainly in, most people have loans. I know Quebec program has a emergency assistance program loan for $50,000. Manitoba has one as well on non-interest bearing and forgivable. This one is $6,000 and is fully forgivable. Eastern Canada, there's community investment funds that are available. Nova Scotia and PEI, I know have NPO support. PEI is handled through United Way. And I know Yukon also has various programs. So you'll have access to these and all the links that are available. And if you look into COVID programs in any of the provincial sites, there will be a specific site relating to programs that they have available for the communities in their respective provinces. So I will, that covers the two quick elements at the end. So we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, I have questions from when I went offline. Most of the questions before then were about the $40,000,
Okay.
and there were a lot of them. So I think we'll tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, we'll get those FAQs answered for everybody and sent out as soon as possible. I don't think it's very difficult to get them all answered, but I do respect time, and I want to get some of these other questions answered today. If on the CEWS, if an employee was on workman's compensation or WSIB claim during the 14-day period, do they qualify?
So basically, if they were on workman's safety benefits for a 14-day period in that period, our understanding currently is that they would not qualify. They have to have illegible remuneration paid without a 14-day break. Okay.
There's a few questions here that are around contract employees. I thought we'd answered that, but maybe you can answer the question again. Are contract employees eligible?
Okay, so I'll define contracts. So like there's the way I would see it, there's two elements. One would be if you have a contract and this is basically a self-employed individual that is not on payroll. So either through invoices or type of arrangements like that. So if it's that type of arrangement, whether it's a self-employed and not through payroll, those costs are not eligible. They're basically considered contractors. If you have a temporary contract, for example, you have somebody on payroll, but only for a specific period of time. So with the season and all that, let's say you have somebody on payroll for 6 months, but they are on payroll under a contract. As long as they go through payroll and there is source deduction, they would be considered illegible remuneration for those employees.
Okay. To be clear, for the CEBA loan or CEBA, you must have employees?
Yes, currently there's, so I'll qualify my answer to start with. There's something new that just came out yesterday that could change that, but currently the original, the CEBA loan, you had to have a RP and a payroll amount of 25,000, a minimum of 25,000. There's been a lot of pressure from the community, including the professionals in our profession, that many organizations may be run without payroll, either like they are contractors because of the nature of the business, or they may, in the private side, they may be shareholders and paying themselves through dividends versus payroll. So finance has heard, but when we answer the questions, if we have clarity as to what they are thinking of changing, we'll include it in our answers. But the objective was to hopefully have more groups qualify for the loan, and if that is the case, the banks would then change their application on their website to have some areas specific for non-payroll applicants.
Okay, just in respect for time, I've got one more, and then what I'd like people to do is if they want to articulate their question a little more, just send them to me by email to danny@curling.ca, and we will get them answered and built into an FAQ, which we'll share with everybody, and we will share an answer back with you. So I just have one more question. We have an operation that's totally volunteer operated. Is there emergency funding to cover a loss of revenue for them, or is it just the loan?
So I'm not familiar with any for loss of revenue. Definitely the loans, depending on which province. So we have the CEBA, and there may be loans available within the various provinces, but there's no specific programs for loss of revenue. The only thing I can say is the one program that we talked about where there's 34.5 million for sports. Maybe this is an area where you work with your provincial body and see if money are received at the provincial body, is there ways for the clubs to benefit from some of that funding for lost revenue? So that would be maybe an angle to take with your provincial body.
One last question. I got two provinces that have asked how come we didn't mention Newfoundland and Labrador and Saskatchewan and other programs. Is that because there aren't other programs in those two provinces, or we just couldn't find them?
At the time of doing the presentation, sorry, I ran out of time, but we can look as to if there's any other programs. I do believe Newfoundland and Labrador have something, but not aware of anything in Saskatchewan at this stage.
Okay, so we'll do some digging at our end to see what those programs are. Okay,
no.
Sorry.
So Danny, for one thing, I know you've mentioned it, but you'll also, all the participants will receive a PDF copy of the slides, so at least you'll have something to refer back on this. So we'll provide a PDF copy to Danny of the final version of the package, and he'll be able to share it with the participants today. So from BDO, we are very proud to have had the opportunity to work with Curling Canada with this. Definitely proud to support one of the most coveted sport in our nation. And I wish everybody safe and healthy period through the pandemic. So I'll turn it over back to you, Danny.
Yes, briefly, on behalf of all the people that have participated today and all of our curling clubs and member associations in Curling Canada, thank you for sharing this information with us. I'm getting a lot of chatting saying that it was very useful and they were quite happy with what they got and they're looking forward to seeing the FAQs. So terrific job. Thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate the participation, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks. And I'm hoping to get everything out to you by early Monday or Tuesday next week from this session. Thanks very much.